4. Oh, air conditioner. Air conditioner. Do that. Alright. Very few subjects were unmoved by what they had been required to do by the experiment. Most, during the experiment, registered protests or pleas of some sort. The man might be ill. This isn't really all right. Or is this really all right? And carried on, and still carried on. Other experiments on the same theme, but with minor alterations, but with minor alterations to the procedure added still more to Milgrim's knowledge about the circumstances which led to compliance. Particularly alarming, for instance, was the outcome of one experiment during which the teachers only had to read the word pairs from cards, while someone else, a confederate of the experimenter, did the shock administering. Here, 37 out of 40 teachers went right on to the end of the experiment because they personally were not involved in giving the shocks and could therefore, they felt, absolve themselves from responsibility. Milgrim pointed out the terrifying implications of this in a society where modern organizations rarely have one person doing everything. Someone shuffles the papers while someone else pulls the trigger. The breaking up of labor into small specialized jobs prevents workers from seeing the whole situation in perspective, so each effectively yields to authority by carrying out his own part. Milgrim also found that obedience to the commands of the authority, the experimenter, diminished if the victim learner was in the same room as the teacher, and was lowest of all if the teacher was required to place the learner's hand on the shock plate so that he would take the necessary punishment when he made a mistake. So Milgrim found that obedience to the commands of the authority diminished if the victim was in the same room was in the same room, and was lower, even lower, if the teacher had to put the learner's hand on the shock plate so that he could take the punishment when he made a mistake. So, well, it's good that a lot of us don't want to do the punishing. But we can be removed from it. We can be 2 steps removed. We can be 1 step removed. But basically, it's a case of out of sight, out of mind. Obedience was highest of all if the learner was completely out of sight, but was still high if he was visible through a glass panel. But most teachers tended to look away as they pressed the switch. If the learner was out of the room, that also served to strengthen the relationship between the experimenter and the teacher, which the teacher was reluctant to break. I'm sorry. Very sorry. The personality of the experimenter had no effects on the teacher's actions. He could be aggressive or non-aggressive, and the outcomes were still the same. But what did make a difference was if the experimenter was out of the room, seemingly out of communication with what was going on inside. In those circumstances, teachers were likely to cheat and consistently administer lower voltage shocks than they were supposed to. In experiments where teachers could choose the voltage of shock they wanted to administer, the majority opted for the lowest. Yay! These behavior traits told Milgrim that the high shock giving in the main experiment did not occur because here seemingly was an experiment where hidden tendencies could allowably come to the fore. So maybe we are not mostly the lunatic fringe. I was so angry at society a couple of videos ago. Just, we're trying to renounce that now. And we're trying to learn, grow. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay. It's okay. Just, anywho, these behavior traits told Milgrim that the high shock giving did not occur because here seemingly was an environment where sadistic tendencies could come out. What does this mean? That there's not that many sadists in the world? They can choose, the experimenters could choose. Most of them wanted to stay in the low range. These behavior traits told Milgrim that what happened before the high shock giving because they were allowed to be tendencies. Okay. So he's thinking that they were in an environment where they could be mean if they wanted to, and it was safe to practice that kind of thing. Did not occur because of that. Other findings, so he ruled out simple sadism. Okay. Other findings here are as follows. Women were normally found to be more yielding to authority than men, but also more anti-aggression. Yet, in experiments where women acted as teachers, they too went on with ministering shocks, just as much as the men. The only difference was that they seemed to suffer more conflict. In some experiments, the teacher would hear the learner arrange a kind of contract with the experimenter. "You'll stop if I ask you to, right?" The experimenter would grunt in what sounded like agreement. Yet, when the learner begged later to be released, the subjects raised the contract as a reason for stopping the test. The authority of an individual has been clearly perceived before the obedience factor comes into play. In experiments where the learner insisted that the experimenter do a trial run as learner first, and the experimenter went through the usual learner's performance of begging to be released, the teacher stopped the experiment despite the learner's insistence that they carry on. Does that make sense at all? Experiments where the learner insisted the experimenter do a trial run as learner first. The experimenter did that. Performance of begging and shit. Teachers stopped the experiment despite the learner's insistence to carry on. Oh, okay. You thought it was a various place. Okay, who cares? I think I understood it, but then I don't think I did. My son has trouble focusing while he concentrates. You just gotta work on it, kiddo. You just gotta work on it slowly. Well, we can take a small minute break here. How you doing? You doing all right? So I'm going to skip that paragraph. You've got the luxury of rewinding it. I don't. So I'm moving on. The learner did not have the authority of the experimenter, therefore his commands did not count. Sometimes Milgrim used two experimenters of equal status, one of whom wanted to stop the experiment midway, to the other affecting to want to carry on. On such occasions, the teacher tended to stop because there was no clear authority structure for him to comply with. Although some teachers did try to establish which of the two experimenters had the higher authority. When they failed, they stopped giving the shocks. However, if, when there were two equal status experimenters involved, one offered to be the learner and his requests to be released were ignored, he had effectively relinquished his authority as far as the teachers were concerned. The other experimenter was seen as clearly in charge now, and if he said to carry on, the teacher carried on. One final variation is worthy of mention. On some occasions, Milgrim set up the experiment so that 3 teachers were involved in the word testing at once, 2 of them being his confederates. First one confederate objected and backed out of the experiment. Then the second followed. The real subject was ordered to continue his and their work. In 36 out of 40 cases, he would refuse to obey. In this situation, he was conforming rather than obeying. He needed to act in accordance with his peers. Milgrim believes that the ability of the ordinary, peace-loving, normally kind individual to obey commands, to be cruel, owes much to the fact that he needed to be obedient in incalculate. Obey commands to be cruel owes much to the fact that the need to be obedient is inculcated in people throughout their lives. Because parental control is part and parcel of youth, from a very young age, the genus of our moral ideals is inseparable from the inculcation of obedient attitudes. To do well in school and then to fit in to an organization, obedience is required. Obedience brings rewards such as good records, privileges, promotion. We so much come to expect that someone will always be in charge, and that authority figure, whoever they are, does not need to exert that authority, just identify it. Loyalty, duty, and discipline are, says Milgrim, are terms that are saturated with moral meaning. The possession of such traits indicates nothing of the intrinsic goodness of an individual, but the adequacy with which a subordinate performs his social role. Having to turn against an authority figure means disruption of a well-established social structure and consequently creates embarrassment that most people cannot handle. Many find obedience the less painful alternative. Milgrim said, although aggressive tendencies are part and parcel of human nature, they have hardly anything to do with the behavior observed in the experiment, nor do they have much to do with the destructive obedience of soldiers in war, or enveloping a Vietnamese village and searing napalm. The typical soldier kills because he is told to kill, and he regards it as his duty to obey orders. The act of shocking the victim does not stem from destructive urges, but from the fact that subjects have become integrated into social structure and are unable to get out of it. That, to Milgrim, is the more frightening. Aggression is easier to explain, easier to take steps to control, but the power of social structure to undermine value moral codes is itself controlling. The result, as with Milgrim's trembling, sweating subjects, is conflict, but they need but the need to obey seems to win. He comments wryly, "We are not perfectly tailored for complete autonomy, nor for total submission." Milgrim's obedience experiments cannot be dismissed on the grounds that it was just one set of experiments after all. When the work was replicated in other countries, such as South Africa, Australia, and Germany, the obedience factor was found to be even higher. A full 85% of subjects complied with the experimenters. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo believes that the obedience factor was higher still in Milgrim's experiments than superficially indicated. Okay. He wrote in a letter to the American psychologist, that's a magazine though, not a person, to the American psychologist. To the American psychologist. No. Anywho, the question to ask of Milgrim's research is not only why did the majority of normal, average subjects behave in evil, felonious ways, but what did the disobeying minority do after they refused to continue to shock the poor soul who was so obviously in pain? Did they intervene? Go to his aid? Denounce the researcher? Protest to a higher authority? Etc.? No. Even their disobedience was within the framework of acceptability. They stayed in their seats, in their assigned place, politely, psychologically demurred, and they waited to be dismissed by the authority, using other measures of obedience in addition to going all the way. On the shock generator, obedience to authority in Milgrim's research was total. That's good shit. Fucking good shit. Obedience goes both ways, or whatever. I think that speaks for itself. I'm just going to keep reading. Sub-commenters have objected to Milgrim's Some commenters have objected to Milgrim's generalization from his findings to the nature of war atrocities, saying that he has taken his conclusions too far. But is he? Sociologist Hannah Arendt, who covered Adolf Eichmann's trial, made the telling statement, "The sad and very uncomfortable truth of the matter is that it was not his fanaticism, but his very conscience that prompted him to adopt his uncompromising attitude. Eichmann had said himself that he would have sent his own father to the gas chamber if ordered to. From Are We All Nazis?" Milgrim's experiment caused a furore. Darn, I had never heard that before. A furore, not least because he was heavily criticized for exposing the poor subjects to such stress and suffering themselves, but the ethics of the experimenters is not the issue here. Another more low-key experiment carried out by American sociologists Sorokin and Boldyreff show the power that an authority figure can unwittingly yield in shaping others' opinions. A piece of music, Brahms' First Symphony, was played twice to a group of over 1,000 school and college students, but the musicians were not identified. Although the same gramophone record was in fact played twice, the experiment introduced the first by saying that the rendering was far superior in beauty and feeling and technical excellence than the version they would hear next. The second was described in Introduction as an exaggerated imitation of a well-known masterpiece, only 4% of the listeners did not accept that they had heard two different pieces of music. The other 96% who didn't argue, Jesus Lord, English people talk funny. Of the 96% who didn't argue, nearly 60% found the first piece superior to the second, 21% didn't know, and 16% disagreed. A very low percentage, therefore, presumed to question the authority of the expert or to disagree with his learned opinion. So only 4% realized that, wait, this is the same piece. 96% deferred to the expert opinion. Some 60% found the piece superior to the second. 21% just couldn't tell. And 16 said definitely they disagreed. Disagreed on what? Disagreed on which one was superior or not. Okay. Alright. That's 20 minutes. We'll come back in a little while.